Hello, my chicklets. Thank you for stopping by. I'm coming to you from a new recording booth that I've got set up, so I'm hoping the quality ends up being a little bit better. If not, we'll move things around and adjust it until I can give y'all the best quality of recording that I can do. For now, I want to jump into another one of the stories written by Lost in Scribbles. This one is called Recipe for Self-Care and Cupcakes. It is very cute. Suspicious. Not that Janus got a craving for instant noodles at 9 p.m. because his hunger was totally quenched by Remus's exquisite experimental dinner tonight, but what was suspicious is that someone else seemed to be rummaging around the Commons kitchen at this hour. As he trotted down the stairs, Janus traversed the living room sneakily to catch a glimpse of the perpetrator through the wooden arch leading into the kitchen. The door of the fridge was standing wide open, blocking his view of the suspect. A bushy head of hair sticking out from the top, along with them humming some random tune as Janus approached the door. Drumming their fingers on the edge of the fridge's door, Janus jumped a little as a familiar father figure suddenly slammed the door shut. "Oh, hi there, kiddo. Janus, whichever you prefer. Fancy running into you here," Patton replied with a wide smile, switching a pack of butter to his right hand while leaning on the kitchen counter with his left. Not repressing a sassy grin, Janus leaned against the archway. "Why ever would you be up so early?" he asked, glancing between Patton and the butter. Patton kept the smile plastered on his face as he seemed to awkwardly shift his glance downward away from him. "Well, in case you were running on an empty stomach, you came at the right time," Patton exclaimed, clapping his hands together. The longer his smile wouldn't fade, the faker it appeared. "I was just busy baking cupcakes." Janus blinked, a confused grimace on his face. He was about to speak up when he felt, and heard, unfortunately, his stomach start to rumble. Don't worry, they'll be done in a jiffy," Patton laughed, Janus feeling his cheeks burning as he pressed his lips together in embarrassment. Patton moved over to the other side of the kitchen, a large glass bowl standing on the counter with a whisk sticking out. As he followed Patton's footsteps, he noticed the kitchen tiles were already covered in flour and small water puddles. Come to think of it, Patton wasn't even wearing his usual apron. "And you didn't find this an odd time to start baking those confectionaries?" Janus prompted him as he followed Patton to the counter. Patton grabbed a small butter knife laying next to the bowl, opening up the pack of butter and slicing it in thin pieces. "Yeah, I guess it was kinda last minute," Patton chuckled, ever smiling and playfully tilting his head at Janus, even though he should be directing his attention to the knife in his hands. "Patton, shouldn't you watch where you're—" "Everyone's had a bit of a rough day, so I really wanted to surprise them with something sweet." Patton's voice sounded giddy but strained, incredibly so. He was slicing the butter dangerously close to his fingers. "But you know, dumb as this dad is, it completely slipped my mind until just now, so—" Janus wanted to grab him by the wrist when Patton dropped the knife and added the slices of butter to the bowl. He seemed to remember something as his head perked up and he glanced away from Janus toward the oven. "Oh boy, the oven isn't even on." Before Janus even had a chance to respond, he saw Patton slip on the wet tiles. As Patton leaned forward to catch his breath, his left hand slid across the counter and tipped over the glass bowl. A fraction of a second before the bowl with contents shattered on the floor. Janus's instincts were luckily quick enough to pull Patton back by his arms. A loud smash, big glass shards flew across the kitchen floor, some of them sliding under the oven. The floor was dyed with raw eggs, sugar, more flour, and butter slices. Janus let out a sigh, shaking a little. "What did I tell you? Pay attention when you're—" And how he wished he could swallow the scolding tone in his voice. The remaining color had drained from Patton's face as Janus looked over at him, staring at his spilled efforts. "Oh, look what a mess I made," Patton chuckled emptily with his strained voice. Janus hurriedly scanned Patton's hands and arms for wounds, but was relieved to find none. That didn't take away his worry, though. Patton was strenuously holding on to that smile of his as he lowered himself down to the floor, shoving some tiny glass splinters out of the way with his knees, and sitting on folded legs, his fingers getting droopy from the egg yolk and white flour as he tried picking up the larger shards. "Patton, please not with your bare hands." Janus said more softly this time, crouching down next to him. He placed a hand on his shoulder and attempted to catch his gaze, but Patton didn't return it. "Let me get a dustpan or something and help you clean this up," Janus added as he opened a nearby cupboard that conveniently had some small plastic bowls he could reach. "You don't have to. I'll just take care of the mess here and start over. It's okay." Patton had 2 rectangular glass shards in his hand, just about covering his palm. Janus placed his own hand under Patton's, keeping it steady. He removed his right hand from Patton's equally shocking shoulder. "It is?" Janus asked carefully, picking up the shards from Patton's palm and placing them in the plastic bowl in front of them. "Are you okay?" Rather than a question, it seemed as if a bullet struck Patton. Janus could see him dropping his smile, his facade, as he squinted his eyes and his lips started trembling. "Of course, I..." Patton almost whispered. Janus had to lean in closer, huddle up, the 2 of them, sitting on cold kitchen tiles and surrounded by broken glass mixed with raw cupcake batter. No, I'm not." Patton let out a whimper as he uttered those words, scooting backwards to lean his back against the fridge door. Janus felt something tug at his chest, a familiar protectiveness that made him slide over to Patton. He may have gotten some batter on his pants, but he didn't mind. "It has been a stressful day, hasn't it?" Feeling the need to adjust his voice to a gentler tone, Janus leaned his hands on both of Patton's knees. Patton had his legs hoisted up closer to his chest. Janus could still see a small drop of tears falling down his cheeks. Patton glanced down, but nodded, and again, Janus felt his chest pounding. He didn't even realize he was inching closer and closer. With every sob or sniff Patton failed to repress. Janus rubbed Patton's knees reassuringly. Good thing Janus had experience with situations like this. "I had an argument with Logan this morning about... what was it about?" Patton shook his head, short gasps in between his words. He wrapped his arms around his legs. His humid breath felt warm against Janus's hands, even with the gloves on. "No need to remember," Janus answered, drawing little circles on Patton's knees with his thumbs. If he could only beckon him to look him in the eyes. Patton was starting to hide his face behind his legs, bangs covering his eyes. "Logan tends to be grumpy in the morning before his coffee any day." "And Virgil? He was worried Thomas had upset a friend of his in the afternoon, and..." Patton darted his eyes over to Janus's hand, still grabbing his knees, and sobbed more intensely. "I tried to reassure him, I did. But it made him more upset, and I made a mess of things." "Virgil worries about everything." Janus talked over him, moving his hands down to stroke Patton's legs. Letting Patton's thoughts spiral would definitely not do him any good. Janus's own legs started to hurt from sitting on them folded for a while now. Retrieving his hands shortly to lift himself off the ground a little, Janus went to sit back on the floor with his legs crossed instead. He made sure to keep talking in the meantime. "And you did your best to calm him down. I'm sure he appreciates your concern and support. But, frankly, who you should be more concerned about." Fed up with the lack of eye contact, Janus let out a short huff and stroked his right hand through Patton's hair, his fingers intertwining with the strands to brush the bangs back from his eyes, bright and blue but wet with tears. "Is you." Patton looked at him confused, but at least he looked at him. He quizzically tilted his head to the left slightly. Janus used the opportunity to move his right hand from ruffling through Patton's hair to cupping his left cheek. "No wonder you're stressed, sweetie, with how much you're giving others every day." "But I'm not," Patton scoffed incredulously, and Janus wiped away some of his tears. "I haven't gotten Thomas motivated to do any cleaning yet. I haven't helped Logan with scheduling videos. Even the cupcakes aren't..." "That's not the giving I meant." Janus cut him off. Patton lowered his legs, spreading them on either side of Janus, till each of them were resting on one of Janus's folded legs, but he didn't mind. "Emotionally giving, Patton. That can be just as draining. The tugging at Janus's chest worsened. The more he had to wipe Patton's face dry with his glove. The tears were still flowing steadily. Janus scooched ever closer, cupping Patton's other cheek. Please, if it gets this draining for you, Janus spoke softly, gently locking his gaze with Patton. He looked so exhausted. Take some time to recharge and unwind. Take care of you instead of them. Patton let out a long sigh, closing his eyes and leaning his face into Janus's palms. I don't know how. I don't know if I should. Janus huffed with a smile, sliding his hand down Patton's face and chin gently, finally dropping them on his shoulders. You should, and I'll tell you how, he replied swiftly, grabbing Patton's hand that he had held close to his chest. He laid them on his own lap instead. You're going to bed, get an early night's rest, while I clean the kitchen. No way! You didn't even... Patton shook his head, stuttering, guilt written all over his face. It's my mess, so I should clean it up, and it's so dirty. I can't let you... Please, I live with Remus. Janus raised his eyebrow at Patton, grinning slightly while clutching his fingers more tightly. This is nothing compared to his everyday mess. Patton leaned forward, his legs pressing down on Janus's. You really wouldn't mind? Patton asked quietly, and Janus detected a hint of gratitude in his expression. I wouldn't. Janus smiled at him. In fact, who knows? I may try my hand at a second batch of cupcakes on my own as a treat for your hard work. Patton's face blushed red, almost bumping the back of his head against the fridge door. What? But it's late, and you don't have to, Janus had hardly ever seen Patton this flustered, but the sight was quite amusing. Might even motivate him to catch Patton off guard with more random acts of uncharacteristic selflessness in the future. You've forgotten what got me here in the first place, Janus smirked. I'd eat anything other than another plate of Remus's licorice lasagna. That got an awkward chuckle out of Patton, which in turn made Janus's heart flutter for a second. Still, I'd rather you go to sleep too, Patton responded with a smile. Seemed like that selfless trait of his will remain persistent. Janus sighed exaggeratedly. Just take my advice, okay? And if you don't know how, ask me. Again, Janus clutched onto Patton's hands, bathing in the warmth of them together for a little while longer. Patton's legs, still lying over Janus's, had almost wrapped themselves around Janus's back. There was always a strangely comforting aura floating around Patton, even in his vulnerable state. I will, Patton nodded, his eyes sparkling as he flashed him a grateful smile. If you promise not to bake me anything, and go to bed after you finish cleaning. Another grin on Janus's face. Sneakily, he ringed around his hands affectionately to hide one of them underneath Patton's. He wouldn't know if Janus's fingers were crossed. All right, no more baking, I promise. Thank you all for listening. Again, that story was Recipe for Self-Care and Cupcakes. I do hope y'all enjoyed it. I am a sucker for these soft, quiet stories that happen in the middle of the night when no one else is around. And I hope you have a wonderful day.